Remove that medal, the judge said coldly. She didn't flinch, she didn't speak, she just stared. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's a declaration of war. They thought Adrienne Miles would fold. They thought stripping her in public would erase what she carried in her bloodline. But they underestimated the kind of woman forged in shadows, polished under pressure, trained to see through the theater of power. A black woman, a decorated colonel, who had bled for a country that still couldn't look her in the eyes without blinking. What you're about to hear wasn't in the newspapers. It wasn't broadcast on state media. This was a containment breach. And now, you're inside it. The courtroom was quiet. Cameras weren't allowed. Phones were confiscated. And still, the system cracked. Because Adrienne didn't scream. She didn't protest. She just stood in a sea of institutional ghosts, wearing the one thing they couldn't confiscate. Her discipline. That Medal of Honor wasn't just pinned to her chest, was burned into her DNA. She'd earned it not for obedience, but for a mission they later classified, buried, and denied ever happened. She'd saved lives that the Pentagon had written off. And now they were trying to write her off. But the power structure made one critical mistake. They thought control was about titles, uniforms, courtrooms. But real power doesn't ask for permission. Real power doesn't beg to be seen. It reveals itself in the moment everyone else folds and you don't. Adrienne Miles stood before a judge who wanted submission. Instead, she gave him silence. Instead, she gave him truth. You see, in elite psychological operations, silence is weaponized. It destabilizes hierarchy. It confuses the predator. It forces those in control to second-guess their own authority. Adrienne wasn't defying the court. She was exposing it by not moving. You're not watching a courtroom drama. You're watching the final breath of an illusion that those in robes and badges hold dominion over your soul. No, the awakening doesn't start with riots. It starts with stillness, with one person refusing to play the part they were assigned. And in that refusal, they tear open the curtain. You're not supposed to hear this story. But now that you have, you're already down the rabbit hole. And the further we go, the more dangerous the truth becomes. Asterisk, they thought history was theirs to write. Asterisk, but Adrienne Miles held a pen that couldn't be stolen. It was carved from bloodlines, silence, and war. Because this didn't start in that courtroom. It started generations ago, when another uniform was forced on her ancestors not to honor them, but to erase them. Asterisk, Adrienne's great-grandfather was used as a live test subject during Project 112. A covert biowarfare program they swore ended in '69. Her uncle, trained at Fort Bragg, then disappeared during an unauthorized mission in Nicaragua that the CIA won't admit happened. Her mother, a nurse in Gulf War syndrome cluster, she died with no formal recognition. Her lungs scorched by toxins never entered into record. Asterisk, so when Adrienne stepped into the military, she wasn't stepping into service. She was stepping into war against a machine that tried to delete her people from memory. Asterisk, and yet she rose. Quietly, precisely, brilliantly. Asterisk. She passed every exam they set to filter her out. Asterisk, she survived every silent test designed to break her spirit. Asterisk, she became what the machine feared. A weapon it didn't control. Asterisk, that Medal of Honor, it wasn't just for battlefield courage. Asterisk, it was a quiet apology from the Department of Defense. A medal pinned by the same system that tried to erase her. Asterisk, but medals have weight. And hers became dangerous. Asterisk, because when a black woman in uniform carries a history the system can't scrub, she becomes radioactive. Not because she's loud, but because she sees the game. Asterisk, they don't fear noise. They fear clarity. Asterisk, in that courtroom, as Adrienne refused to remove her medal, the judge's voice shook. He masked it in stern commands. But every syllable betrayed fear, not of her violence, but of her restraint. Asterisk, you see. Psychological dominance isn't about shouting. It's about holding center while the world tries to unmake you. The more silent she became, the more exposed their insecurity grew. Asterisk, because Adrienne represented something they couldn't catalog, a sovereign identity, an unbroken lineage. Asterisk, a soldier who served, but never submitted. Asterisk, and now, I want you to write to words in the comments twice. Asterisk, I remember. Asterisk, I remember. It's not for the algorithm. It's for your initiation. Asterisk, because men who forget history become puppets. Asterisk, but men who remember, they become architects. We're not done. Let's go deeper. Adrienne's silence was not passive, it was precision warfare. Asterisk because here's what they don't teach in history class. The courtroom isn't where truth lives. It's where truth is managed, framed, edited, sanitized. But Adrienne didn't come to be managed. She came to collapse the stage, and collapse it she did. See, the courtroom wasn't just a room, it was a ritual. The judge, the robe, the gavel. It's all theater, a ceremonial power structure. But like any ritual, it requires participation. The moment Adrienne refused to remove her medal, she broke the script. She shattered the illusion that this system was neutral, and it sent a signal, one that moved like a tremor through the Department of Defense, through the intelligence corridors, through the silent watchers of internal compliance who had flagged her long before the hearing. Because Adrienne knew things. She'd been embedded in black budget projects, sat in briefing rooms, where things were said that can't be unsaid. Asterisk, she knew where the satellites were aimed, not at enemies, but at us. Asterisk, she knew why soldiers came back broken, not from combat, but from experiments. And she knew what the medal really meant. Leverage, because once you're decorated, they expect your loyalty. Asterisk, but if you decide to speak, that medal becomes a liability. Asterisk, so they staged this trial, not to discipline her, but to destroy her credibility. Asterisk, remove the medal, and the narrative collapses into silence. But she didn't move. What the judge didn't know, what the cameras couldn't capture was that, in that moment, Adrienne wasn't alone. Every invisible veteran who'd been erased, every whistleblower buried by secrecy clauses, every soldier who died unnamed in an off-book war, stood behind her. That courtroom became a battlefield, not of bullets, but of memory. Adrienne didn't raise her voice. She raised the dead. Asterisk, because in systems of psychological control, there's one thing they can't tolerate, a mirror. And Adrienne was the mirror. She held it to their face and forced them to look. The judge called for order. Asterisk, but it was too late. The order they built had already fractured. Asterisk, if you're still watching, you're not just witnessing a story, you're feeling a crack in the system. Let's go further down. This rabbit hole doesn't end with Adrienne. Asterisk, it begins with her. They told you the Medal of Honor is the highest recognition a soldier can receive. Asterisk, what they didn't tell you is that it's also a leash. Adrienne knew this. She accepted that medal not as a trophy, but as a trap. Asterisk, and like any true strategist, she turned the trap against its maker. Asterisk, behind closed doors, she'd been part of operations classified above, top secret. Missions that don't show up on Pentagon databases. Missions involving what they called non-standard warfare variables. Not insurgents, not foreign enemies, but internal threats, civilian dissidents, social experiment targets, influence groups implanted in black communities to suppress generational momentum. Asterisk, she was ordered to surveil people who looked like her, spoke like her, trusted her, and when she refused to feed disinformation back up the chain, the system labeled her unstable. That's how they erase warriors with conscience, not with bullets, but with diagnosis codes. Asterisk, so when Adrienne stood trial, it wasn't for breaking the law, it was for breaking protocol. Because protocol says, you salute the machine, no matter what it demands. Asterisk, but Adrienne knew something most men never figure out. The system doesn't hate rebels. It feeds off them. Asterisk, it makes icons of their failure, writes books about their downfall, then files their resistance under heroic tragedy, so the next generation can be inspired by defeat. Asterisk, but she refused to be another sacrifice. Asterisk, that's why she never raised her voice. Because when you scream, they brand you unstable. When you plead, they call you emotional. But when you stand unmoved, silent, eyes locked, you become what they fear. Asterisk, a man or woman with nothing left to prove. Asterisk. Every intelligence agency has a term for this kind of individual. They call them stateless operators, uncontrolled, unbranded, UNOWNED. And Adrienne, she became their living glitch, not just in the courtroom, but in the data. Because shortly after her hearing, something strange happened. Her military file redacted, her missions sealed under new codes, her psych profile disappeared. The system didn't delete her out of vengeance. They deleted her out of fear. You see, when a soldier becomes a symbol, that's dangerous. But when a symbol becomes contagious, you get a reckoning, and it's already begun. You feel it, don't you? Let's keep going. What comes next will make you question everything. The day after Adrienne's hearing, 3 senior judges, on that same federal bench, submitted emergency requests for private security. No threats had been made. No names were released. And yet, they were afraid. Why? Because something ancient had been awakened. Not a protest. Not a movement. But a memory buried so deep. Even the architects of power thought it was myth. Adrienne Miles had tapped into something older than America. Older than empires. She wasn't resisting the system, she was reminding it. Reminding it of the oaths it broke. The blood it buried. The knowledge it tried to silence through generations of miseducation. You think this story is about medals and courtrooms? No doubt. This is about psychological warfare on the public mind, where institutions teach you who to fear, what to forget, and when to submit. And Adrienne, she cracked that programming, because the Medal of Honor, in its original conception, was never meant for compliance. It was for defiance. It was given to those who held the line when orders failed, who protected life when command lost its soul. But somewhere along the way, they twisted it, weaponized the narrative, made the medal a symbol of obedience, not courage. Adrienne knew the original code, and by refusing to give it up, she restored its truth. That's why they fear her. Not because she broke protocol, but because she broke the spell. You see, every system of control relies on collective illusion. The illusion that authority is sacred, that robes equal justice, that medals define loyalty. But what happens when someone inside the machine exposes the lie? Not with a leak, not with a press conference, but with a quiet refusal to kneel. You get collapse. The court transcript doesn't show it, but that judge, he stuttered. He paused, he looked away. Because in that moment, he wasn't in control. Adrienne was. And when a sovereign human stares back at power without fear, they remind everyone in the room of a truth that cannot be legislated. You were born free, and no robe, no badge, no flag can take that from you. The reckoning didn't start with a march, it started with a silence so loud, it cracked marble. Let's keep descending. They tried to bury her in bureaucracy, red tape, media, silence, legal jargon no civilian could untangle. But Adrienne didn't need a microphone, because the truth was louder than propaganda. Within 72 hours of the hearing, encrypted files began leaking across dark military forums. Untraceable, unsigned, but unmistakably real documents, showing covert, psychological conditioning programs, not on enemies, but on American soldiers. MK variants. SEER overlays used not to train resilience, but to test compliance thresholds. And buried in the metadata. Initials, AM. Adrienne Miles didn't disappear. She went underground. Because she knew, if you want to dismantle a system of control, you don't scream into the storm. You become the lightning. That's what makes her dangerous. She didn't break the machine from the outside. She rewired it from within. You were never supposed to hear her name. That's why no major network covered it. Why every article was quietly removed. Why her military record now shows honorably discharged, with no rank, no service history, no medal. They didn't strip it, they erased it. But here's the twist. That's exactly what she wanted. Because power doesn't come from recognition. It comes from invisibility. She went dark to go deeper, not to hide, but to haunt. And her silence became contagious. Officers started resigning. Data analysts refused. Orders. An entire intel unit in Maryland disbanded overnight under internal audit. Because when you expose the roots of the machine, not just the corruption, but the architecture of obedience, you don't just wake up rebels. You awaken warriors, men who were trained to kill for empire, now choosing to protect truth. Men who were used as tools, now remembering they were born as weapons of will. And if you're still watching, you're part of that awakening. This isn't about one colonel, it's about you. What orders have you obeyed that betrayed your soul? What medals have you worn that weren't yours? What silence have you maintained, just to stay safe? That ends tonight, because Adrienne Miles didn't vanish. She multiplied. And now she's in you. We're not done. What comes next will shatter the ceiling of everything you were taught to believe. You were taught to respect the chain of command. Salute the flag, obey orders even when they don't make sense. But what if I told you that chain of command wasn't built to protect freedom, it was built to contain it? Adrienne Miles understood that. She knew the system doesn't fear chaos. It manufactures chaos, so it can justify more control. Every war you've ever seen on TV, every terror threat, every courtroom drama about national security, it's all smoke to keep you looking outward, while the real war is inward. A war for your mind, for your identity, for the story you believe about what it means to be American. And that's what Adrienne shattered, not just in court, but in us. Because once a man sees the strings, he can't go back to being a puppet. Once a woman recognizes the cage, she stops decorating it. And once a soldier refuses to kneel, entire empires begin to tremble. That's the power of a single sovereign act. And if you feel it in your chest right now, good, because this video wasn't just made to inform you. It was made to unlock you. You were never meant to be a passive observer. We're built for depth, danger, defiance. So if you've made it this far, type it in the comments twice. I see the chains. I refuse the leash. I see the chains. I refuse the leash. Say it loud enough, and even the algorithm can't ignore it, because your voice is the crack in their matrix. Adrienne was just the beginning. Now it's your move. You've been drafted not into their war, but into truth's revolution. What they fear most isn't a riot. It's remembrance of who you were before. They told you who to be. You're not broken. You're betrayed. You're not powerless. You're programmed. And tonight, the signal broke through. You felt it. Now ask yourself, what will you do with it? Because once your eyes adjust to the dark, you begin to see everything. Stay sharp. They're watching, but so are we.